She slid the pen back across the table, smiled at me with all her teeth, and said, "No hard feelings, Walter. It's just business." I told her there were no hard feelings at all. That was the truth. There weren't. Hard feelings are loud. Hard feelings make you slam doors and hire the meanest lawyer in town and burn the photographs in the backyard. What I felt that afternoon was something quieter than that. Colder. The feeling a man gets when he's been waiting 18 years for someone to make exactly the mistake they just made. And they finally made it, and they don't even know it yet. She thought she had taken everything. The house in the hills, the lake place, the cars, 1,200 white oak barrels of bourbon sleeping in my rick houses, worth more than most people see in 3 lifetimes. She had the deeds in a leather folder and a check in her purse, and a man half her age waiting in the parking lot. She had no idea that the one thing she made me sign away, the one clause she didn't even bother to read, because it had nothing to do with money, was the only thing that mattered. She just handed me my whole life back and paid me $2 million to take it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the morning the whole thing started, because if you've ever loved somebody who turned out to be holding the knife the entire time, you already know the exact temperature of that first cut. If that's you, do me a favour and tap the like button and subscribe, because this story is going to land somewhere personal. Stay with me to the end. The last 5 minutes are the reason I'm telling it at all. It started on a Thursday in October, in the kitchen of the house I built with my own 2 hands, 40 years before I could afford a single thing in it. We lived about 20 minutes outside Bardstown, Kentucky, bourbon country. From the kitchen window you can see the long grey roof lines of the rick houses down the hill, 6 of them, holding the family's whole patient fortune in white oak. I was 68 years old that morning, and I'd spent 50 of those years learning that the best thing in the world a man can make is something that just needs time, and to be left alone. I was standing at the counter pouring my coffee when Camille walked in. She was 46 and beautiful in the way that cost a great deal of money to stay. Tennis whites, though I hadn't seen her swing a racket since spring. Sunglasses indoors. She had her phone in one hand and a thick cream-coloured envelope in the other, and she set the envelope down on the island between us with a flat little slap that I felt in my teeth. She didn't say good morning, she said, "I had Preston draw these up. I want a divorce, Walter, and I want it clean and I want it fast." I'll tell you the truth. I wasn't shocked. You don't share a bed with somebody for 11 years and miss the slow drift. The late calls she'd step onto the porch to take. The way she'd flinch just slightly when I'd reach for her hand at dinner. The new wellness coach who'd started coming to the lake house 3 days a week to teach her breath work, whatever that is. A man knows. A man just decides how long he's willing to pretend he doesn't. So I didn't raise my voice. I have built a life out of not being the first one in a room to show his hand. I picked up the envelope and weighed it in my palm and set it back down. And I asked her one quiet question. What brought this on? She laughed. Not a real laugh. A dry, practiced one. "Walter, look at you," she said. "You're tired. You're old. You want to sit on that porch and talk about your daddy still and watch the bourbon sleep. I'm not done living. I've got years left in me and I'm not going to spend them being a nurse to a man who's already halfway to the rocking chair." I let that sit. I deserved some of it, I suppose. I never lied about my age. When we married, she told everyone she fell for my steadiness. Turned out steadiness was just a word she used for the things my steadiness could buy. I asked her what she wanted. She tapped the envelope with one long nail. "It's all in there. I want the house. It's my taste anyway, not yours. I want the lake place. I want the Aston and the 2 trucks and the new Range Rover. And I want the distillery, Walter. The barrels, the brand, the name, all of it. Hale and Daughter is worth more than everything else combined, and I earned half of it sitting next to you at every one of those tedious dinners." I looked out the window at the rick houses. I did the arithmetic in my head, the way I always do. What she was asking for came to something north of $40 million. She was asking me to hand her the work of 3 generations and walk out with a coffee mug. Most men would have come up out of their chair. Most men would have said something about loyalty, about all the years, about everything they'd given. I have watched grown men lose a fortune in a single sentence because they couldn't keep a sentence inside their mouth. So I didn't say any of that. I asked the one thing she should have led with. The thing a mother says first. "What about Hannah?" "Hannah is our daughter. She was 14 that fall. A quiet kid with my mother's grey eyes and her own strange music in her head. more interested in books and old maps than in anything that glitters. She's the only person on this earth who liked the Rick houses as much as I do. From the time she could walk, she'd follow me down the hill, holding my finger, and we'd stand in the cool dark between the racks where the air is thick and sweet, and she'd close her eyes and breathe it in like other kids breathe in birthday cake. She worshipped her mother. That's the part that still gets me. Camille treated that girl like an accessory she'd bought on impulse and then gone off, but Hannah kept trying anyway, kept laying little gifts at the foot of a woman who never once bent down to pick them up. When I asked about Hannah, Camille sighed. The same sigh she gives when the housekeeper folds a towel wrong. That's the other thing, she said. You keep her. I asked her to say it again. I thought, surely I'd heard it wrong. She picked a thread off her white skirt and didn't look up. You keep her, Walter. She's 14. She's practically grown. And she's so much like you. She's heavy. She mopes. She wants to talk about feelings and dead grandparents and the way the barrels breathe. And I cannot drag a sad little shadow around Europe with me. She drains me. You've got money. Hire whoever you need. She'll be better off with you anyway. I have signed contracts that gave away companies. I have stood at gravesides. I had never in my life felt the specific cold that went through me in that kitchen. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even cruel, the way cruel people are cruel, with heat behind it. She was bored. She was handing back our child the way you return a sweater that turned out to be the wrong colour. And then I heard the side door. Hannah was standing in the mudroom doorway in her school clothes, backpack on one shoulder, an apple in her hand. She'd come down to grab breakfast before the bus. She was pale and she was very still, and I understood immediately that she had heard all of it. Every word. She's heavy. She drains me. You keep her. She looked at her mother and waited. You could see her waiting for the joke, waiting for Camille to laugh and say, "Oh, honey, I'm just being dramatic. Come here, I didn't mean it." Camille turned, saw her, and didn't even have the decency to look away. "Don't look at me like that, Hannah," she said. "I'm not a monster. I'm being honest. You're old enough to hear it. Your father and I are going to live separate lives now, and you're going to stay with him, and it's better for everyone. You don't need me hovering. You need your books and your daddy and his Rick houses. I gave you 14 years. I'm allowed to want the rest of mine." The apple hit the tile floor. Hannah didn't run, the way you'd expect a kid to. She just turned around, slow, and walked back out the door she'd come in. I heard the bus brakes hiss at the end of the drive. I heard her get on it. She went to school. My 14-year-old went and sat through a day of algebra 2 hours after her mother told her she'd been kept like a houseplant. I stood up from the table. The chair scraped loud on the floor. For the first time in 20 years, the calm slipped off my face, and Camille saw what was under it. And for half a second something moved behind her sunglasses that might have been fear. She recovered fast. She always did. She checked the little gold watch I'd given her on our 5th anniversary and said, "I've got a thing at the club. Have Preston call your guy. Let's just get it done, Walter. I'd like to be in Paris by Thanksgiving." And she walked out. Tennis shoes squeaking on the floor. I'd had laid the year Hannah was born. She did not go after her daughter. She did not look back at the Rick houses she was so eager to own. She got in the Range Rover and drove down the hill and out the gate, certain she'd just won the biggest hand of her life. I stood alone in that kitchen for a long time. She'd come at my money. I could have forgiven the money. Money's just stored time, and I had time to make more. She'd come at my pride. I could have lived with that too. Pride's a young man's weakness, and I'm not young. But she'd looked my daughter in the eye and called her a burden. She'd broken something in that girl that I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to glue back together. And that I was not going to forgive. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call my brother. I called Diane Okafor, the only lawyer in 3 counties that other lawyers are scared of, and when she picked up, I told her what I needed. "Diane," I said, "Camille wants a divorce. She wants the house, the lake place, the cars, and the distillery. All of it. The whole brand." There was a pause. Then Diane said, low and dangerous, "Walter, I will bury that woman. By the time I'm done, she won't have cab fare." "Give me a week." "No," I said. I was watching the Rick houses through the window. The fog was still down in the low spots. "You're going to draw it up exactly the way she wants it. Give her the house. Give her the cars. Give her the lake. Give her every barrel and the brand and the name on it. Don't fight a single line." "Walter, There's one clause, I said. One. And it is not negotiable. And it goes at the very back where she won't read it because by then she'll be looking at the cheque. She signs away all parental rights to Hannah, and any claim, now or ever, to anything held in Hannah's name. A full and final severance. She wants out of that child's life. Fine, we're going to make it permanent, and we're going to make it legal. The line was quiet a long moment. Walter, Diane said carefully, you understand you're about to hand a woman who just abandoned her kid roughly $40 million. For free. I watched the fog start to lift off the hill. I'm not handing her anything, Diane, I said. I'm handing her a bill. She just can't read the total yet. Let me tell you who I am so the rest of this makes sense, because I wasn't always the man with 6 rickhouses on a hill. My granddad ran a still in a holler in eastern Kentucky that the government would have very much liked to know about. My daddy went legitimate, barely, with a license and a tin-roofed shed and 1 copper pot the size of a man, and he taught me 2 things before he died. The first was how to read a barrel by the sound of it when you knock. The second was that the world is full of people who'll smile in your face and take the food off your child's plate. And the only protection against them is to build something they can see but can't actually hold. I was poor for a long time. Then I wasn't. I took Daddy's 1 pot still, and that tin shed, and I spent 30 years turning it into Hale and Daughter, and somewhere in there the bourbon got good. The kind of good that wins the medals and makes the collectors lose their minds and sells out before it's even bottled. By the time I was 60, a single barrel of our top expression went for more than the truck I drove. And here is the thing that mattered. The thing nobody, outside a handful of lawyers, ever understood about how I'd built it. I'd been married before, long time ago, before Camille. That marriage ended the way they do, and when it did, my first wife's attorney came at me like a wolf at a wounded thing, and I learned a lesson I never forgot. When you build everything into one big shiny pile, you make it easy. 1 grab and it's gone. So I'm right out the other side of that divorce. Broke, furious, smarter. And I sat down with a young accountant named Nathaniel Brandt, who's an old man now like me, and we built the thing carefully this time. We built it to come apart in a very particular way. Here's what most people think a bourbon company is. They think it's the barrels, all that liquid gold sleeping in the dark. And the barrels are worth a fortune, no question. But a barrel of bourbon is only worth a fortune because of what's painted on the head of it. The name, Hale and Daughter. The trademark. The reputation that took 3 generations to earn and that lets a man charge $2,000 for something that cost him $40 to make. Strip the name off and you don't have rare bourbon anymore. You have a barrel of anonymous brown liquor. That, legally you can't even call by our brand, that you have to pay taxes to store and insurance to protect, and that the bulk market will buy off you, if you're lucky, for the price of the wood it's sitting in. So 18 years ago, right when Hannah was born, Nate and I did something. We took the part that actually has the value, the trademark, the name, the mash bills, the recipes my granddad died with in his head, and I wrote down at last, the licensing rights to every bit of it. And we put all of it, into an irrevocable trust, the Hannah Hale Family Trust, the operating company, the one that owns the buildings and the barrels and the trucks and the bottling line. It doesn't own the name. It licenses the name from the trust, pays a royalty for the right to call its bourbon Hale and Daughter. That's a perfectly ordinary arrangement. Big companies do it all the time, splitting the brand off from the operations. And buried in the license, on a page that Nate and I read out loud to each other, twice to be sure, there is a clause. If control of the operating company ever passes to anyone who is not a Hale by blood, the license to use the name terminates. Not in 99 years. Not on renewal. That day. At midnight. Camille wanted the operating company. She wanted the barrels and the buildings and the brand all in one beautiful pile, exactly the way I taught the whole industry to picture it. She had no idea the name was sitting in a trust 2 miles away, with my daughter's signature destiny on it. She had no idea that the second she took control, the operating company would lose the only thing that made all that sleeping bourbon worth a dime. And the only person who could approve a new license, the only beneficiary, the one whose interest the trustees were legally bound to protect, was a 14-year-old girl her own mother was about to legally erase herself from. So when Diane called me back 2 days later, half furious, and said, "Walter, I drew the severance clause, but I have to tell you on the record, this is financial suicide. She gets the brand. I said, Diane, pull the file on the Hannah Hale Family Trust. Read me the change of control provision in the license, then call me back to eat her. She called me back 40 minutes later. She wasn't furious anymore. She was laughing the way people laugh when they've just watched somebody walk smiling off a cliff. Walter, she said, she's going to take the barrels and not the label. That's right. And to take the brand for real, to get a new license, she'd have to go to the trust, which means she'd have to go to the beneficiary. Which is the kid she's making me sign her away from. Yes. Diane was quiet a second. You diabolical old man, she said with something close to admiration. Make sure the severance clause is on top of the stack when they sign. I want it to be the last thing she signs before the check, and I want her in such a hurry to get to the check that she never reads it. That's the plan, I said. Draw it up. Let them think they gutted me. Let Preston think he's the smartest man in the room. I want this done before she ever thinks to ask what the trust holds. We met to sign 3 weeks later, in the glass conference room on the top floor of Preston Vance's building downtown, the kind of room built to make you feel small. Preston is the lawyer rich women in this town hire when they want a husband skinned. He's got teeth too white to be real, and a tan that comes from a bottle, and he was flipping through Diane's settlement draft with a little hum of pleasure on every page, the way a man hums over a steak. Camille sat next to him in a black dress that cost more than my first truck, fresh from somewhere expensive, and she didn't look at me once. Smart of her. If she'd looked at me, she might have remembered the kitchen and the apple on the floor. I came in with Diane and one battered accordion folder. That was it. No team. No boxes. I sat down and I folded my hands, and I let my shoulders sag a little, like a tired old man who just wants it over. I'd practiced that. Well, Preston said, leaning back, lacing his fingers behind his head. This is more than reasonable, Walter. Generous, honestly. Surprisingly generous. He narrowed his eyes a hair. He was a predator, and predators don't trust a free meal. He was looking for the catch. I gave him nothing. I'm 68, Preston, I said. I just want peace. I want my daughter settled, and I want to be left alone with what's left. Camille leaned forward then. She smelled like vanilla and victory. It's the least you could do, she said to the table. After the years I gave you. Preston cleared his throat. There are a couple of small additions my client would like to discuss, he said. And I knew right then they were going to push, because people like them always push. They can never just take the win. Given the disparity in earning potential going forward, and the lifestyle Camille's grown accustomed to, we feel a clean asset transfer isn't quite enough to secure her future. We'd like 2 things. 1, Walter covers all legal fees, both sides. And 2, he let it hang, enjoying himself, a lump sum support buyout. 2 million, wide within 24 hours of signing. Diane started to come out of her chair. That's extortion, Preston. We're walking. I put my hand flat on the table. Sit down, Diane. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. She didn't know the whole shape of it yet, what the 2 million would buy me. She sat. I watched Camille's face when Preston said 2 million. Her eyes went bright. 2 million in cash was a number she could feel. It was Paris. It was freedom. It was the boy in the parking lot. She was practically humming with it. I'll pay the fees, I said slowly, like every word cost me. And I'll pay the 2 million. Camille made a small sound, almost a laugh, and squeezed Preston's arm. But I've got one condition, I said. Preston spread his hands, all reasonable now that he thought he'd won. We're not renegotiating the brand, Walter. It's got nothing to do with the brand, I said. It's about Hannah. Camille's face cooled. What about her? I reached into the accordion folder and took out a single document. The one Diane and I had written ourselves, the one I'd read so many times I could say it from memory. I laid it on the glass and slid it across to her. This is a waiver of parental rights, I said. You voluntarily and permanently terminate all custody, all guardianship, all say in her medical care, her schooling, where she lives, who she becomes. And you waive any claim, now or at any point in the future, to her estate, her trust, or any asset held in her name. You don't get to call her. You don't get to come back in 5 years when you're bored and try to be her mother for a weekend. You sign this, and to the law, you are a stranger to my daughter. You walk all the way out, the way you said you wanted. The room got very quiet. Even Preston looked uncomfortable, and Preston has helped a lot of people do a lot of ugly things. You want me to sign away my own daughter? Camille said. It wasn't quite a question. I want you to put in writing what you already said out loud in my kitchen, I said. With her standing in the doorway, you sign this, you get your $2 million on top of everything else. You don't sign it, the deal's off, and I will spend every last dollar I have making sure you leave that courtroom with nothing. I will set the money on fire before I let you have it. Try me. She looked at the waiver. She looked at Preston. Is it legal? She asked him. He glanced at it, shrugged. If you sign it freely, yes, it's binding. But Camille, the optics, if anyone ever found out. I don't care about optics, she snapped. I care about my life. She looked at me, and her eyes were the coldest thing in that cold glass room. She hates me anyway, she said, mostly to herself, the way people do when they're talking themselves over a line. She's always sulking. She reminds me how old I'm getting. She'll be fine. She's got her father. And she picked up the pen. She didn't hesitate. She didn't read it. She didn't ask if she could see Hannah one last time, or write her a letter, or set aside one single thing to remember her by. She turned straight to the signature line, the way I knew she would, because greedy people only ever read down to the dollar amount. She signed her name with a big looping flourish. Camille Hale. And she pushed the paper back at me and said, There, she's all yours. Now where's my check? I picked up the waiver. I checked the signature. It was good. I folded it twice and slid it into my breast pocket, against my chest, because it was the single most valuable thing in that building. And everyone in the room thought it was nothing but a sad piece of paper about a kid. Diane, I said, give her the check. Diane slid a cashier's check across the glass with a look of pure contempt. Camille snatched it up, stared at the zeros, and her whole face opened into a smile. She stood and smoothed her dress. Well, Walter, she said, bright as morning. No hard feelings, right? It's just business. No hard feelings, Camille, I said. It's just business. Preston shook my hand on the way out and told me I was a gentleman. Camille was already texting somebody in the parking lot. The boy, I figured. At the door, she turned and said, I'm throwing a party at the distillery this weekend. A new chapter. You're not invited, obviously. Of course not, I said. I rode the elevator down with Diane. She was shaking, just slightly. That was the worst thing I've ever watched a person do, she whispered. She sold her own child without blinking. She did, I said. The doors opened on the lobby, and in doing it, she signed away the only person on earth who could ever give her the one thing she actually needs. Oh, what's that? I stepped out into the grey Kentucky afternoon. Permission, I said. I took out my phone and I sent Nate Brandt 3 words. It's done. Go. The day we moved out of the house in the hills felt less like leaving home and more like a deportation. Camille supervised it. She stood in the front hall with a clipboard like a prison warden doing cell inspection, sipping sparkling water, while Hannah and I carried our lives down the steps in cardboard boxes. She wasn't helping. She was auditing. Every time I reached for something that wasn't strictly clothes, she'd clear her throat and point a long nail at her list. Not the painting, Walter. That's on the inventory. It's a print, Camille. It cost $20 at a fair. It ties the room together. Leave it. I left it. I didn't have a single fight left to give over a wall. I just wanted to get my girl out before I lost my temper, and did something that put the whole plan at risk. But then I heard Hannah cry out from the tasting room off the front hall. And I went fast. There's a copper pot still in the corner of that room. Small one, the original. The one my daddy built in the tin shed. The one his daddy ran moonshine through in a holler. It's dented and green with age, and it doesn't make a drop anymore. It just sits there as the soul of the whole place. I learned to read a mash on that still. I taught Hannah to knock a barrel standing right next to it, her little hand on the copper. Hannah had her arms wrapped around it, trying to walk it toward the door, straining, her face red, and Camille was standing in front of her with that tight little smile. Put it down, Hannah. You're scratching the floor. It's ours, Hannah said, her voice cracking right down the middle. It was Grandad's. It was his daddy's. Dad, tell her. You don't even drink, Camille said. You're 14. What are you going to do with an old still? It doesn't matter what I do with it, Hannah shouted. It's ours. It's the whole family. It's listed as a fixture in the tasting room, Camille said, cool as the water in her glass. Your father signed the building over. The fixtures convey. It stays. She didn't want that still. She wouldn't know a pot still from a hot water heater. She wanted it because Hannah loved it. And taking the things Hannah loved was how she proved to herself that she'd won. It was a power move and nothing else. I walked over and put my hands on my daughter's shoulders. She was shaking under them. Let it go, baby, I said quietly. Dad. It's copper and solder, Hannah, I said, looking straight at Camille while I said it. It's a thing. The music's not in the still. It's in us. We carry it. She can keep the box. Let her keep the box. Hannah's fingers trailed off the copper. She slumped against me, beaten. Camille said, very poetic. Now get the junk out. I've got a designer coming at 2. We carried the last boxes out to my truck. A 94 F250 with 250,000 miles on it. The one vehicle Camille hadn't wanted in the settlement, because she said it looked like something a farmhand drove. It's rusted and it rattles, and the air conditioner died under Clinton. It was that morning the only thing on the whole property that was still mine. We pulled out of the gate. Camille stood in the doorway between the big oak columns, queen of everything she could see, and she gave us a little fluttering wave. Bye, you two, she called. Don't be strangers. She tilted her head and smiled. Actually, do. It's easier. I didn't wave back. I looked at the rick houses one more time, grey and patient down the hill, 1,200 barrels of bourbon sleeping in the dark with my granddad's name on every single one of them. I looked at the gate closing behind us with that heavy iron clang. To anybody driving past, we were the losers. The old man and the sad kid, rattling away from a mansion in a rust bucket, stripped down to nothing. I glanced at the clock on the dash. 11 in the morning. I thought, 13 hours. 13 hours until midnight. 13 hours until the divorce recorded, and the name on those 1,200 barrels stopped being hers to use. Don't look back, Hannah, I said. She was crying quiet in the passenger seat, watching the gate shrink in the mirror. We're not going that way. Here's the part I'm not proud of. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. The whole thing depended on Camille believing she'd won completely, right up until the floor opened. If Camille got so much as a whisper that I'd planned it, that the brand was a trap, that the trust held the name, she could march into court before midnight and scream fraud, freeze the whole thing, tie it up for years. I couldn't risk one slip, and a heartbroken, furious 14-year-old is not a safe place to keep a secret. So I had to let my daughter think I'd lost. I had to let her watch us move into a one-bedroom apartment over an old storefront and think her father was a coward. We moved into the rooms above the original shop, the little brick building on a side street downtown where my daddy first sold bourbon legal, before any of the rest of it existed. The trust owns the building. Camille never knew it existed, never thought to ask. Upstairs it's 2 cramped rooms and a kitchen the size of a closet, and a window that looks out on a brick wall and a dumpster. Downstairs, behind a roll-up door, is dust and old crates and the smell of 100 years of oak. That first night Hannah stood in the middle of the bare living room and looked at the water stain on the ceiling and the radiator clanking in the corner, and she turned on me. This is it, she said. This is where we live now. For a while, I said. For a while. She laughed, this awful bitter laugh that doesn't belong in a kid that age. Dad, we had 6 rick houses this morning. We had a lake, and you just gave it to her. All of it. You let her take Granddad's still. You didn't even fight. Her voice climbed and cracked. You're Walter Hale. People write magazine articles about you, and you just rolled over and signed and said thank you. Why? Why are we here? I went to the kitchen and turned on the tap. It groaned and spat brown a second before it ran clear. I made a deal, Hannah. I gave her the assets to get clean custody, to make sure she could never come back and use you to get at me. That was the price. That wasn't the price of custody, she shouted. That was the price of you being scared of her. You let her win, Dad. She's up there right now drinking champagne in our house, laughing at us, and we're down here listening to a radiator and a dumpster truck. She won, and you handed it to her because you were too tired, or too soft, or too, whatever, to stand up for me one single time. She wasn't wrong about the one thing that mattered. I hadn't stood up for her in that kitchen. I'd said your mother's just upset. She doesn't mean it, when I should have stood between them. I'll carry that. It's complicated, I said. It was the weakest thing I could have said, and I knew it. It's pathetic, she said, and she picked up a box of her books and threw it against the wall, and the cardboard split and her paperbacks went sliding across the floor. I hate her for leaving, she whispered, and her face crumpled. But I hate you for letting her. She went into the bedroom, the only bedroom. I'd been sleeping on the couch and would be for months, and she shut the door, and I stood there and listened to my daughter sob through a wall. I could have punched through with one hand, and I let her think I was a weak old man, because that was the price too, and it was higher than the 40 million. I was hungry and there was nothing in the place but bread and a package of bologna, and a jar of mustard from a gas station. I made a sandwich standing at the counter and I couldn't swallow it. The faucet was dripping. Drip, drip, drip. A worn washer, that's all. In that little silent apartment, it sounded like a clock, so I did the only thing I knew how to do with my hands when everything else was out of reach. I got the old red toolbox out of the truck, the same one I'd carried into my first job site 45 years ago, when I was 22 and broken mixing mash by hand. I got down on the kitchen floor on my bad knees and I took that faucet apart, and I found the cracked washer, and I put in a new one, and I tightened it down. My hands smelled like metal and oil, the way they smelled before there were ever any boardrooms. I turned the water on. Off. Silence. It held. I washed my hands in my own quiet sink, and I looked at my reflection in the dark window. And I looked exactly like the beaten old fool everybody thought I was. I checked my watch. 6 in the evening. 6 hours left. Let them think I'm broken, I thought. Let her have her party. Let my own daughter hate me for one more night. It would make the morning that much sweeter. A few weeks into the new life, I figured it was time to be seen. The whole illusion only worked if people believed I was finished, so I needed to go let them watch me be finished in public. I put on my one good suit, charcoal, Italian, used to fit like armour. Now it hung off me a little, after a month of stress and skipped meals. I drove the rusted truck downtown to the Whiskey Row Gala, the big annual bourbon and money affair, where every distiller and broker and collector in the state shakes hands and pretends to like each other. I was meeting an old friend, Sam Calloway, who sits on the state distilling board, one of the few who still took my calls after the news got around. The valet looked at my truck like it might be contagious. I gave him my last $5 bill and went in. The room hit me like a wall of money, char oak and old leather and women's perfume. The exact smell of the life I'd just signed away on purpose. Sam was at a corner table looking uncomfortable, checking his watch, glancing around to see who was watching him sit with me. Walter, he said low. Heard about the settlement. Total surrender. That's not the man I know. I'm tired, Sam. I just wanted my girl settled and a clean break. He shook his head. Whole town saying you lost your nerve. Saying you're liquidating just to cover the legal bills. People are calling you a cautionary tale. Let them, I said. Reputation's a currency, Sam. Peace is an asset. When the bill came, I reached for it on pure reflex. 50 years of being the man who picks up the check, and handed the waiter my card. The black one. The heavy metal one that used to open any door in the state. He came back 2 minutes later, leaned down and said quietly, I'm sorry, Mr. Hale. The card's been declined. Of course it had. It was tied to accounts that were tied to assets I'd just signed away. Camille had probably cancelled the cards the same hour the ink dried. For one stupid second I'd forgotten the game I was playing. I've got another one, I said, patting pockets I knew were empty. Oh, don't bother, Walter. I knew that voice before I turned around. Bright and amused and cold. Camille was standing there in something new and expensive. Hair lighter, skin glowing from somewhere with a fountain in the lobby. And next to her, holding her hand, was the boy, Julian, the wellness coach. Maybe 28, jaw like he'd had it installed, shirt unbuttoned one button too far, the smug shine of a man living entirely on someone else's money. Camille looked at the waiter, then at me, and her eyes were dancing. Put it on my tab, she said with a little flick of her hand. My ex-husband's having a liquidity moment. The waiter said, "Yes, ma'am," and got out of there. Camille stepped closer, dragging that cloud of vanilla. She looked me up and down, the loose suit, the grey stubble, the tired eyes, slow so the tables nearby could enjoy it. "You look terrible, Walter," she said, loud enough to carry. "I heard you're living over some old shop. Is that true? Tell me that's not true." She reached out and patted my cheek, the way you'd pat a sad old dog. "It's honestly a little pathetic. You used to own this room. Now you can't buy a glass of your own bourbon." The room had gone quiet. Old partners, people who used to beg for an hour of my time, all of them watching the lion get a kick from the hyena, and a few of them, God help me, smiling. I stepped back, out from under her hand. "You're very generous, Camille," I said, even and quiet. "Thank you for the meal. Enjoy the party." I turned to Sam, who'd found something fascinating in his bourbon, and wouldn't look up. "Sorry about that, Sam. Good to see you." I walked out through the whole staring length of that room, past the bar, past every whisper, out into the cold, where the valet brought my truck around. It coughed and backfired loud as a gunshot, and a woman waiting for her, Mercedes, jumped. I climbed in and gripped the wheel until my knuckles went white, and I let the shame sit on me, the full weight of it. My own wife paying for my dinner with my own money, while her boy watched, and the whole town laughed. And then I let it go. I let it cool and harden into the one thing that's actually useful, because she'd just told me everything I needed to know. She was careless. She was so drunk on the win that she wasn't watching her feet. She was spending money she didn't really have on credit lines tied to assets she didn't really control, and she had never once, not one time, asked the only question that mattered: who owns the name? I reached into the glove box and took out a cheap prepaid phone, untraceable, and I dialed a number I'd had memorized for weeks. "It's me," I said when Nate picked up. "It's time." "You're sure, Walter?" Nate said. "Once I file, there's no walking it back." I watched the valet pull Camille's new Range Rover around to the door. She came out laughing on Julian's arm. "She just bought my dinner, Nate," I said. "Called it pathetic, yeah, I'm sure." "All right," he said. "I'll file the license termination with the trust on record first thing, effective midnight of the recording date. Which means it's already dead, she just doesn't know it. Tax and storage liability transfers to the new title holder of the barrels, which is her. Then I serve the notice." "Good," I said. "And Nate, have the man serve it at the distillery, during the party if she's still throwing one. I want her to read it standing in the middle of her own celebration." I snapped the phone shut and drove back across town to the apartment over the shop. And I was not tired anymore. I was awake all the way down to my boots. Let me tell you exactly how the trap is shaped, because it's the cleanest thing I ever built, and I want you to see it the way I see it. A few nights after the gala, after Hannah was asleep, I pulled the grey lockbox out from under the couch. Camille had supervised the packing like a vulture, but she'd only been hunting for things that shone. The lockbox looked like it held old tax receipts and warranty cards. To me, it was the whole war. 329, the combination my daddy used on the shed. Inside, no cash, no jewels, just files gone soft at the edges. I found the one labelled in my own hand from 18 years back, Hannah Hale Family Trust, and I spread it out under the bare kitchen bulb and went over it one more time, the way you check a parachute. Here's the math Nate ran for me, the morning after the gala, in a diner out by the interstate where nobody we knew would see us. Camille now owned 1,200 barrels of aging bourbon. On paper, with the brand, north of $30 million of inventory. Without the brand, and the brand was gone at midnight of the recording sitting safe in Hannah's trust, those barrels were just bulk whiskey. Anonymous. She couldn't legally sell a drop of it as Hale and Daughter. She'd have to dump it on the bulk market as no-name juice. And the bulk market, in a soft year, pays a few $100s a barrel for that, when it pays at all. But it gets worse for her, and this is the part that makes it beautiful. You can't just walk away from 1,200 barrels of bourbon. Aging bourbon costs money every single day. It exists. The federal excise tax, state barrel taxes, Kentucky taxes every barrel where it sits, every year. Insurance on a flammable, valuable, evaporating asset. The cost of the rickhouse, the rotation, the security. It runs to a fortune a month. And as long as she paid the operating company to use the name, Those costs got covered by the revenue the name brought in. The minute the name was gone, the revenue was gone. But the barrels stayed, and the taxes stayed, and the insurance stayed, and the bills came to the name on the title. Camille Hale. Nate slid the spreadsheet across the diner table, carrying cost on 1,200 barrels, with the back taxes the operating company had been deferring under the old structure now coming due on transfer of control. She owed, immediately, a little over $600,000, within 30 days, just to keep barrels she could no longer sell, and the $2 million I'd given her. She'd already burned through most of it. Deposits on the Paris apartment, Julian's car, the party, the lawyer, the lifestyle. She doesn't have the liquidity, I told Nate. No, he said, sipping his tea. She doesn't. And when she can't pay the storage and the taxes, Nate smiled, dry and thin. Then the Rick houses, which the trust controls the ground lease on, by the way. That's a separate little knot we tied. They're entitled to seize the barrels against the unpaid bill. The trust buys the whole inventory at the lean price, which is the price of distressed bulk whiskey. He looked at me over his glasses. Pennies on the dollar, Walter. You'll buy back your own bourbon, with the name already in the trust, for less than the federal tax you'll owe on it. I sat there in that diner with my coffee going cold, and I thought about my daddy in the tin shed, telling me about people who'll smile in your face and take the food off your child's plate. Build something they can see but can't hold. Serve her tonight, I said. She's having her party. The lights of the distillery were on for the party, every one of them, blazing up the hill so you could see the glow from the highway, like something burning. I parked the truck on the shoulder a quarter mile down and I watched. I knew exactly what was happening inside because I'd watched Camille throw 100 of those things. Dom flowing into the good crystal. Music too loud. Her club friends. The women who'd whispered about my age behind my back, drinking my bourbon and toasting her freedom. Julian in a linen suit she'd bought him, working the room. Camille at the centre of it all, in white, queen of a castle she'd stolen, giving tours of the tasting room, putting a hand on my daddy's copper still, and telling people she'd curated it. A grey sedan pulled up the service drive at the back. Not a guest. A man named Hollis, the process server Nate kept on retainer, careful and patient and immune to charm. He checked his watch. He waited. He wouldn't knock a second before midnight. The law is precise, and so was he. Midnight came. Somewhere under the music, a clock turned over, and on a piece of paper filed downtown, the name on 1,200 barrels of bourbon quietly stopped being hers. The doorbell rang. I imagine she frowned. Who rings a doorbell at midnight? A surprise. A late celebrity. She loved a surprise when it came wrapped in gold. She'd have walked to the door in her white dress, heels clicking on the floor I had laid, smiling, expecting a gift. She got a tired man in a cheap jacket holding a thick envelope. Delivery for Camille Hale, he said. She laughed, I'd bet, champagne bright. Is it a singing telegram? Did Walter send some sad little plea? She signed his clipboard with a flourish. Camille Hale, the signature of the lady of the manor. The owner. He handed her the envelope and turned and walked back into the dark without a word, and she shut the door, and she stood there under the chandelier, holding the live grenade I'd handed her 3 weeks before, pin already pulled. Open it, somebody called. She tore it open in front of all of them. The top page wasn't a card. It was heavy bond paper with a letterhead she'd never seen. Hannah Hale Family Trust. Notice of termination of trademark license. Notice of lien for unpaid carrying costs and barrel taxes. Amount due immediately, $612,000. I don't know exactly what her face did, but I know my Camille. I know she read termination of license and didn't understand it, because she'd never once asked what a license was. I know she got to amount due immediately, $612,000, and laughed out loud because that's what she did with anything she didn't understand. She held it up and read it to the room like a joke. Listen to this. He wants me to pay $600,000 to keep my bourbon in my warehouse. He thinks I have to pay rent on whiskey I own. Can you believe this sad old man? And the room laughed with her, because the room didn't know either. And then, I'd bet money on this part. Somewhere down the page, her eyes snagged on a sentence she did understand. You may no longer market, label, or sell any product under the name Hale and Daughter, which is the sole property of the trust. I bet she stopped laughing for just a second. A flicker, and then she shoved it away, because winners don't get evicted from their own party, and she shouted, "Turn the music up," and she tore the notice in half and threw the pieces over her head like confetti, and she danced on the scraps of it in her white dress, and her friends cheered her defiance because none of them knew they were cheering a woman who'd just shredded her own warning. From the shoulder of the road, I watched the lights pulse with the music. I didn't need to see inside. I knew she'd tear it up. I knew her. And tearing it up was perfect, because tearing it up meant she'd been served and had chosen to ignore it. It meant she wasn't calling a lawyer tonight. She was dancing. Every song she danced was a song she wasn't spending fighting back. I put the truck in gear and drove home to the rooms over the shop, and the dark didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like cover. She was queen of the castle. For one more night. But the floor was already gone out from under her. She just hadn't fallen through it yet. She came at me anyway. Of course she did. When the lawyers explained to her in the cold light of morning that the notice was real, Camille didn't accept it. She went on offence. Preston filed an emergency motion, a restraining order, a civil suit for harassment and fraud, claiming I'd served her bogus papers to terrorise her in a property she legally owned. She wanted me held in contempt. She wanted damages. She wanted to strip away the last shred of dignity I had left. And she wanted to do it in front of a judge. So a month later, we were back in a courtroom. And this one didn't smell like money. It smelled like floor wax and old wood, the smell of a place where lives get taken apart. Camille sat at the plaintiff's table in black, looking less like a wronged ex-wife than an avenging angel. Preston was beside her, arranging his papers, sure of himself. Across the gallery, in the back row, sat Julian, scrolling his phone, bored. I sat with Diane and one accordion folder. The judge was a no-nonsense woman named Harlow, who clearly had no patience for rich people fighting over a bourbon company. She peered over her glasses at Preston. "Mr. Vance, your client alleges the defendant has harassed her by serving fraudulent eviction and lien notices on property she lawfully owns. That's the claim." Preston stood, buttoned his jacket. "It is, Your Honour. Just 5 weeks ago, Mr. Hale signed a binding settlement transferring his entire operation, buildings, inventory, brand integritet, to my client. We have the executed transfer right here. He gave her the keys. And then, out of spite, he hired a process server to disrupt her private event with these absurd documents claiming she owes him hundreds of thousands of dollars to occupy her own distillery. It's harassment, Your Honour. Plain and simple." He walked the settlement up to the bench. "Signed by Walter Hale. 100% ownership of the operation, including the brand, to Camille Hale. Airtight." Judge Harlow scanned it, looked at me. "Mr. Hale, did you sign this?" I stood, slow, knees popping in the quiet. "I did, Your Honour. I transferred the operating company to my ex-wife. The buildings. The barrels. I gave her the operation. Then what's this?" Preston cut in, waving the torn notice he'd taped back together. "Why are you sending lien notices on a company you gave away?" "Because," I said, and I let it land easy, "owning the company isn't the same as owning the name." The room went still. Preston frowned. "It's a bourbon brand. The company is the name." "Not this one," I said. Diane handed copies up to the bench and across to Preston. I took the old trust file out of my folder and walked it up myself and laid it next to the settlement. "Your Honour, 18 years ago I separated this business. The trademark, the brand, the recipes, the name Hale, and daughter. All of it. I placed in an irrevocable trust for the benefit of my daughter. The operating company doesn't own the name. It licenses it from the trust. It pays a royalty for the right to call its bourbon by that name. That's an ordinary structure. Brands and operations get split all the time." I let her read for a second. Preston was reading too. Fast, his colour draining. "And the licence," I went on, "contains a change of control clause. If control of the operating company passes to anyone who is not a Hale by blood, the licence terminates at midnight on the date of transfer. My ex-wife is not a Hale by blood. She took control. The licence terminated. As of that night, she owns 1,200 barrels of bourbon that she has no legal right to call by the only name that gives them value. And under the terms she inherited with the title, she owes the trust for the taxes and storage on every one of them." Preston looked up from the file. He looked at Camille. He looked like a man watching a wave come in that he should have seen on the horizon an hour ago. Richard, Camille whispered. She meant Preston, got the name wrong. She was that rattled. What is he saying? He's saying, Preston said slowly, you own the barrels. You don't own the brand. Objection, he tried, turning back to the bench, scrambling. Your Honour, this is a technicality. The clear intent of the settlement was to transfer the entire going concern. The intent of the settlement, I said, was to transfer what was listed. What was listed was the operating company. The name was never listed because I have never personally owned the name. The trust owns it. I cannot give away what was never mine to give. Judge Harlow took off her glasses. She looked at Preston with something close to pity. Mr. Vance, she said, did you run a search on the trademark before you advised your client to sign? Did you check who held the brand? Preston opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He hadn't. He'd seen a famous bourbon company and assumed the company owned its own name, the way most companies do, and he'd never thought to check. It was a rookie mistake, born of being certain he'd already won. No, Your Honour, he said. The judge turned to me. Is the trust the lawful owner of the trademark? Yes, Your Honour. And the licence to use it has terminated by its own terms? At midnight on the recording date? Yes. She nodded and turned to Camille, and her voice was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. Ms. Hale, you are the lawful owner of a bourbon company and a great deal of aging inventory, but you have no legal right to use the name Hale and Daughter, and you are responsible for the carrying costs and taxes on that inventory. The harassment claim is dismissed. The notices appear valid on their face. She picked up her gavel. I'd strongly suggest you retain counsel, who can negotiate with the trust before the carrying costs bury you. Case dismissed. The gavel came down like a knock on a barrel. Camille came up out of her chair. You can't. It's my company. He gave it to me. I have the deed. You have a company, the judge said, gathering her papers. It just can't sell anything. That's not the court's problem to solve, ma'am. That's a problem for you and the trust. In the murmur and shuffle of the room emptying out, Diane stood up, walked around the table, and stopped beside Camille's chair. She had one sheet of paper in her hand. Not a court document. An invoice. She leaned down, close to Camille's ear, and said 5 words. The name belongs to Hannah. Camille flinched like she'd been touched with a hot wire. She turned her head slow. What? Diane straightened up and said it again, loud enough now for Preston to hear every syllable. The trademark is held in the Hannah Hale Family Trust. Irrevocable. Sole beneficiary. Your daughter. The only person on earth who could ever grant you a new license, the only person who could let you legally sell 1 bottle of that bourbon ever again, is Hannah. She set the invoice down on top of the useless deed. And 5 weeks ago, in writing, you permanently severed yourself from her. You waived every right to her, her estate, and anything held in her name. You didn't just sign away your daughter, Camille. You signed away the only key that fit the lock. I watched it land. I watched the whole shape of it finally arrive behind her eyes. The kitchen, the apple on the floor, the looping signature she never read, the boy in the parking lot, the dancing in the white dress. All of it folding into one understanding. She hadn't escaped. She'd walked into a cage, smiling, and signed the door shut from the inside, and then the last small piece fell. Julian had been watching from the back row the whole time. He'd heard the numbers, 600,000 owed, a company that couldn't sell a thing, a name locked behind a child she could never reach again. He stood up slow. He didn't go to her. He checked his hair in the glass of the gallery partition, smoothed his collar, and walked toward the doors. Julian, Camille said, her voice gone high and thin. Julian, where are you going? I think I left my phone in the car, he said, not turning around, and he pushed through the heavy doors and was gone. He wasn't coming back. The money train had jumped the rail and he stepped off before it went over. She was alone then. All the way alone. The husband she threw away stood against her. The daughter she discarded held the only thing she needed. The boy she bought had walked out mid-sentence. The lawyer she hired was already stuffing his briefcase, trying to figure out how he'd explain malpractice to his partners. The colour went out of her face all at once, left it grey. She put her hand on the table and missed it, and her knees gave, and she went down into a heap of black silk and gold in the middle of the courtroom. The bailiff called for the nurse. I didn't feel triumph. People expect me to say I did. I didn't. I felt something heavier and quieter than that. The feeling of a ledger finally balancing, of a debt, 18 years in the making, paid in full. I turned to Diane. Have Nate file the lien on the barrels by 5, I said. I don't want her selling off bulk juice to make a tax payment. Done, Diane said, and I walked out, past the woman on the floor, toward the hallway where my daughter was waiting on a bench, headphones around her neck, looking scared. The air in that hallway was cool and clean. It smelled, faintly, the way the rick houses smell, the way home smells. We got a pizza on the way back. Greasy, lukewarm, in a stained box, eaten at the wobbly little table in the rooms over the shop. After a month of that apartment and everything that came before it, I swear it tasted like the best meal of my life. Hannah had read the news on her phone. Bourbon heiress loses brand in stunning courtroom reversal. She set the phone face down and looked at me, and for the first time in weeks the shadows under her eyes had lifted a little. You planned it, she said. All of it. 18 years, you knew. I took a sip of my Coke. I didn't know, Hannah. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped she'd love you the way she was supposed to. I built the trust the year you were born because of how my first marriage ended. Because I swore nobody would ever take the food off my kid's plate again. I built it praying I'd never need it. I set the can down. You don't build a rick house hoping for a fire. You build it so that if the fire comes, the thing that matters is already somewhere it can't reach. So what happens now? She said. To the barrels. To her. I told her the rest plain. The trust holds the name and always will. Camille can't sell the bourbon and can't pay the taxes on it. So within a few months she'll be drowning. She'll try to sell the company. Nobody sane will buy a distillery that can't use its own name and bleeds money every day it exists. The price will fall and fall. And when it's low enough, basically scrap. The trust will quietly buy the whole operation back. The barrels, the buildings, Grandad's copper still. We'll own it all again, name and barrels reunited, for less than the federal tax she's about to owe on whiskey she can't sell. And the $2 million I paid her, most of it will go right back out the door to lawyers and taxmen. She'll be lucky to walk away with enough for a used car. Hannah was quiet a while. That's brutal, Dad, she said finally. It's accounting, I said. But listen to me. I waited until she looked at me. This trust, this name, this whole thing, it's yours, legally, as the beneficiary. And the day you understand that the way I need you to understand it is the day you stop being scared of it. You watched what wanting things did to your mother. You watched it eat her hollow. The money from this brand is not for sports cars or for looking down on people or for buying somebody to hold your hand. While you're a kid, it pays for one thing, your education and a roof, and the rest goes to families around here who need it more than we do. You'll drive that truck till the wheels come off. You'll work summers in the rick house like I did, hauling barrels smelling like char. You will not see a dime of spending money you didn't earn. Are we clear? She didn't argue. She didn't pout. She'd grown a year in a single afternoon in that courtroom. She'd seen the devil's face and the law's blade, and she understood the difference between them now. We're clear, she said, and then soft, I'm sorry I called you a coward. You weren't all the way wrong, I said. I should have stood between you and her in that kitchen. I let her say what she said. I'll carry that as long as I live, baby. Don't be like me. Don't wait. Don't keep the peace when somebody's hurting somebody you love. You stand up the first time, you hear me? She picked up her Coke and held it out across the table. To the name on the barrel, she said. I clinked my can against hers, tinny, hollow, nothing like crystal. The best sound I'd heard in a year. To the name on the barrel, I said, and to knowing who really owns it. So that's the whole of it. People in town still tell the story like I lost. The old man who handed his bourbon empire to his wife and ended up over a storefront. Some of them are still telling it that way, and I let them, because I learned a long time ago that the loud ones are always busy celebrating, and the quiet ones are busy owning the ground the loud ones are dancing on. Camille chased everything that shines, the house, the cars, the barrels, the brand. She got it all, and it turned to vapour in her hands because she never once asked what made any of it worth holding. In bourbon we have a name for the part that evaporates out of the barrel while it sleeps. The whiskey that just rises up and disappears into the wood and the air. We call it the angel's share. Camille thought she walked out of that courtroom with 1,200 barrels. She walked out with the angel's share, the part that was never going to be hers, the part that just goes up and is gone. And me, I've got my daughter, who follows me down the hill again on Saturdays to knock the barrels and breathe in the dark. I've got my granddad still back where it belongs. I've got a name that 3 generations bled for, sitting safe where greed can't reach it, waiting for the next hail to earn it. Real wealth was never the empire you show the world. It was the foundation you bury for your kids. Don't ever mistake a quiet man for a beaten one. And before you take everything somebody's willing to hand you, stop, just for 1 second, and ask yourself why on earth they're letting you take it so easy. If you stuck around to the end and you like seeing justice served slow and cold, do me that favour. Hit the like button, subscribe and turn on the bell so the next story finds you. And tell me down in the comments, if it were you, could you have kept quiet and waited 18 years to spring the trap? Or would you have come up out of that chair the first morning? I'll see you in the next one.